What is up everyone, welcome to another camera comparison video, and before we get started, let's talk about the testing process. All of the photos were taken on auto mode with auto HDR on. AI was also enabled. Both of these two smartphones comes with Pro mode, and if you have that much time to play with the features and options, then you can try to get to a perfect shot of your choice based on your preference. But once again, I took all the photos in auto mode cause most of the general consumers use auto mode. After checking hundreds of photos side by side, I found some differences, and the main differences are white balance, sharpness and dynamic range. Also, color rendition is different in different occasions. But like any other camera comparison, this is going to be a preference thing, I mean that color grading thing. But dynamic range and details, okay, we all have the same preference, that is, the more the better. In terms of details, truly there are very less details in most of the occasions. I had to crop in to differentiate. I'm really pleased to see that a $200 smartphone could grab and process a lot of details, but that's under bright lighting condition. In low light environment, it suffers a bit due to its aperture and poor post-processing. Okay, the first difference you'd notice is the color rendition. Yeah, check the sky and those green trees. But that doesn't show the whole thing. Let us crop in. Now check the colors and the background. Do you see the difference? It didn't happen once or twice, happened frequently. Yes, I am talking about less details, blurriness, a bit of saturation and white balance issue on Poco X3. The truth is, at a glance, it's very difficult to identify those issues, and on a smartphone screen, you wouldn't even notice these. I mean, if you don't put a few different images side by side, crop in and check carefully, only then you will find those issues. I'm really not that surprised to see the differences in sharpness. Poco X3 falls behind with its lower mid-range processor. Redmi K30 Ultra on the other hand has better ISP and did better. For sure, Poco X3 performance is good considering it belongs to a lower segment than Redmi K30 Ultra, and it occasionally managed to reproduce images that is truly lucrative. But K30 Ultra with wider dynamic range, almost perfect exposure, great details, sharpness and better white balance stays far ahead than Poco X3 in daytime main sensor photos. Yes, none of these are perfect for portrait shots cause none of these comes with a telephoto lens. But don't forget that both comes with Sony IMX680 264 megapixel main sensor and 2 megapixel dedicated depth sensor. I have taken portrait shots both in outdoor and indoor environment. I'm not only surprised but also pretty much amazed by the performance of Poco X3. No, don't even think that Poco X3 can beat Redmi K30 Ultra in portrait mode. Poco X3 did great considering it comes with a Snapdragon 732G and has a way cheaper price tag. I would say camera performance is really good enough. I don't wanna repeat about dynamic range, details and color rendition. Redmi K30 Ultra produced very natural looking portraits with almost perfect color rendition, and I like exposure on K30 Ultra. There are two things I must mention. Yes, edge detection of both of these two are not that good. Both in bright daylight and in low light environment, it's the same. In a bit difficult to detect condition, most of the times you may find unnatural and very sharp cutouts around the edges of the subject, and blur effect is only applied on the upper part of the image. Not only that, half of the background, especially the objects near the subject, gets totally undetected as background and gets the same treatment as the subject. As I have mentioned earlier, if you do not crop in and check carefully, if you don't need true to life color rendering and skin tone, if you don't care about details and textures, Poco X3 NFC is really good enough. But this is not a good match to compare with Redmi K30 Ultra, at least not for human portrait photography. Time for indoor artificial light condition, and one word seems perfect for Poco X3 NFC: aggressive. Yes, when there are a lot of colors needed to process and reproduce, then Poco X3 goes wild. Yes, when there are a lot of colors needed to process and reproduce, then Poco X3 goes wild. Not only that, Poco X3 NFC loses details, sharpness and the whole image goes very soft. Redmi K30 Ultra keeps the natural tone. Yes, saturation jumps back and forth between these two smartphones, but What Poco X3 NFC algorithm does to make things lucrative takes it to a bit far from reality. Not only saturation, white balance also jumps back and forth between these two smartphones, and we will surely talk more about that. But for now, look at the skin tone of these images. Have you found the difference? Yes, skin tone and color rendition changes on both Poco X3 NFC and Redmi K30 Ultra frequently. It is more drastic on Poco X3 NFC but subtle or minimum on Redmi K30 Ultra. Details and shadows are pretty similar on both of the smartphones in indoor low light environment. Both does have a pretty good and effective post-processing, but it seems like Poco X3 NFC have a lot of room for improvement through updates, where Redmi K30 Ultra already improved with its newest update. Once again, like I always say, a lot depends on personal preferences, but I believe that true to life color tone and more details is really important. As I have mentioned earlier, white balance issue gets bigger in indoor low light environment. Yes, especially Redmi K30 Ultra produces images with a bit heavy warm tone. However, Redmi K30 Ultra grabs more details, processed more details in the shadows, and color tone is also close to reality in most of the images. I mean where white balance is close to reality. In some pictures I found it difficult to differentiate at a glance and I had to crop in and check. Yes, there are differences, and once again let me mention that Redmi K30 Ultra has true to life color tone, more textures and sharpness. But I would say Poco X3 NFC performance is really good as a lower mid-range smartphone. I know night mode is one of the most interesting part of a camera review and a lot of people wait for this part. K30 Ultra and Poco X3 NFC low light or night mode performance is really different. Sometimes it's very drastic, and considering the different segment they belong to, it's really not that surprising. Black is deep black on Redmi K30 Ultra, color rendition and exposure is also very good. K30 Ultra goes for brightness in most of the occasion, but that doesn't mean added noise and grains. On the other hand, Poco X3 NFC has more noise and grains along with the brightness. Also, I have mentioned it earlier that sometimes Redmi K30 Ultra fails to grab enough details, and if you have tiny bit of movement, blurriness is inevitable. The same thing applies to Poco X3 NFC, and like in this comparison, it goes more with Poco X3 NFC. It is really very difficult to get very good night mode photos with Poco X3 NFC. Redmi K30 Ultra continues to produce results that is close to reality and true to life. Poco X3 NFC has exposure and saturation issue. Details and sharpness is almost similar. Also, I don't see any drastic difference in white balance. But color rendition is truly true to life on Redmi K30 Ultra. Redmi K30 Ultra selfie performance is more natural, skin tone is close to reality and background have way more details. Moving on to selfie portrait, the main attributes are there, it's the same. This time both me and Samara choose the pictures on the left. But I know some people who wants to look fair and beautiful would go for Redmi K30 Ultra. Similar edge detection, similar bokeh effect but with better color grading and details. I feel like Poco X3 NFC looks better. But once again, I cannot deny that Redmi K30 Ultra has slightly better color grading. If you want, then you can record 4K videos and performance is really amazing. Both now exports to REC 709 and has very good color grading considering that these are mid-range smartphones. I am really surprised to see the amount of details and textures. Look at the stabilization, amazing. However, it is really an obvious that Redmi K30 Ultra did better color rendition. Exposure is also pretty good. I mean there are some kind of exposure issue on Poco X3. If you check carefully, then you will see stabilization is also better on Redmi K30 Ultra. But make no mistake, don't take away any credit from Poco X3 NFC. Yes, exposure is an issue on Poco X3, also autofocus and texture processing is not as good as Redmi K30 Ultra. Color grading, skin tone, dynamic range, details and sharpness in every segment, Poco X3 NFC comes close, but Redmi K30 Ultra did better. Anyway, time to wrap up, and I think Poco X3 did great, but Redmi K30 Ultra is the winner. What do you think? Please don't forget to make a comment. If you have liked this video, then please don't forget to click on the like button and subscribe to this channel.